debate. We're discussing the trial in Turkey and the possible next steps. A major trial then ending with the former head of the military jailed for life over a coup plot to overthrow Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government. There were 250 defendants in all. The court acquitted 21 of them, but convicted and sentenced more than 40, including military officers, a journalist and a police chief. The sentences range from a year to life. So is this Turkey shedding the influence of the military or becoming more like an Islamic state? Here to work out where the truth lies are our guests. Let's introduce them one more time. Dorothée is researcher and director on the contemporary Turkey programme at IFRI. That's the Institut Français des Relations Internationales. Thank you very much for being with us. On the other side of our studio, Arnaud CASTAIGNET, the communications and consultant and member of the board of directors of Youth Diplomacy. Arnaud, also a former risk analyst advising on countries including Turkey. Good to see you. By satellite, joining us from Ankara is Abdullah Bozkurt, who's the Ankara bureau chief and columnist for the daily newspaper Zaman. Abdullah, thanks for bearing with us over that short break we've had. By phone, joining us from Littleton, New Hampshire in the USA, Henri, who's Professor of International Relations at Lehigh University. We've already heard from Mr. Barkey, of course, informative stuff too. And by phone from London, Tolga joining us. He is an expert on Turkish economic affairs, based at King's in London, but also a risk analyst as well. Tolga, before I bring you back in, let's hear some reaction to the trial verdicts from an opposition MP in Turkey. That's Akif Hamza Cebi.
This is a threat to the army of the Republic of Turkey. It is not acceptable. If you are trying someone who has been the commander of the Turkish armed forces for being a member of a terrorist organization, that means you are targeting and trying the army of the Republic of Turkey. This country will not accept it.
So, Tolga, would you say this trial has been an attack on the army of Turkey?
I would suggest that it was an attack on the army's involvement, in desire to be involved in the politics. But after a while, it turned into a much more campaign against the other opposition figures. I mean, there are a lot of controversial reports about it, so it's a big debatable issue. But I would suggest that it's very clear that army has been really affected by that. A lot of officers have resigned. The trust in army is very hard. We've seen it in this year's army appointment schedules. There are a lot of now very less generals, and it raises questions about army's capabilities. But on the other hand, I think what the opposition MP said, I think it's now it has been what they have been saying since this trial began. But with those Gezi protests, I would suggest that paradigm in Turkey has now shifted. Ergenekon and this whole process has been part of another debate. And I think with Gezi, all those controversies in the justice system, all the criticism to persecutors and those trials are being highlighted. But I think in the long run, the Turkey's political spectrum will shift from this, so I would say in quote, Islamist and secular fight to more freedom versus more authoritarian tendencies. And I think it's most important. But this trial's effect will be, of course, in Turkey's history. And I think the stance the opposition takes will be very decisive on this issue.
Let's bring in Abdullah Bozkurt from the daily paper Zaman, the Ankara bureau chief of that paper. Abdullah, I don't know whether you heard what Tolga was saying there, but and obviously previous the quotation from a member of the Republican Party there in Turkey saying this was an attack on the army. Thinking about the type of protest that we've seen in Istanbul and then spreading beyond the country, of course, against Prime Minister Erdogan's rule. Is this the kind of verdict, what we've seen today, this kind of case, this kind of trial, is this going to make those people who are protesting, say, in Istanbul and Gezi Park, is it going to make those kind of people feel better about their life in Turkey today?
Well, I don't think the Gezi Park protest has anything to do with the verdict that we have seen today. Gezi protest started out of the environmental concern. It was very peaceful initially, but later it was hijacked by the violent extremist group. and it turned into anti-government protest nationwide. Now it's faded away. But the Ergenekon case has started into, since 2007, it has been going on, and it was before the Gezi Park protests, kicked in Turkey. Even before Ergenekon case, we had another major coup trial, which called SCHMID case. And the verdict was already rendered in that one a couple of months ago. It's on the appeal process now. So I think we are mixing apples and oranges here. And secondly, we are also trying to create an image that the government is interfering with the independent judiciary, as if the government ordering the judges to come up with the harsh sentences against the former chief of the general staff, which came up with a very comprehensive plan to overthrow the government, including setting up hundreds of the websites, all directed with the criticism of the government and with the taxpayers' money. So when you see this kind of evidence, very compelling evidence in the court of law, judges had no choice but to render that kind of harsh sentence against the military officers, including the former general chief of staff. So I think we need to make a distinction here. One has nothing to do with another. With the Gezi Park protests, I think there is something else. As we have seen in the last, especially since 2011, when the government shifted towards more like authoritarian rule of democracy rather than liberal one, which they promised in the elections. But that has nothing to do with the military having subordinate role.
Indeed, Abdullah,
to the
what you were saying,
civilian,
and certainly the way that the protests were put down in Istanbul, it certainly made the EU sit up and take notice and say that this will seriously block and handicap Turkey's bid for EU membership. And that's the EU speaking about that. Thank you for your contribution. Let me bring in our guests here in the studio. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, Abdullah. Dorothée and Arnaud here. I'll start with you, Dorothée. In terms of what Abdullah is saying there in Ankara, the events of Gezi Park and what happened today, no relation at all. But is there not a feeling in Turkey that the style of government of Erdogan basically umbrellas all of this and leads to a feeling that there is the government trying to control more and more of people's lives?
But there again, you assume that the government is interfering with the trial, which is not proved exactly. But anyway, undoubtedly, what's going on with all of the trials with the military has exposed the flaws of the Turkish democracy, because the way the trials were conducted has been widely criticized by all human rights organizations. It's been widely observed, and it did not abide by the rules of any normal, liberal democratic judiciary process. So I think this cannot be. This has to be acknowledged, definitely. But what matters to me today is that the maturity of the political debate in Turkey still seems to be very low, because we have a case of conspiracy against conspiracy. Like Abdullah Bozkurt defends the idea that there has been a conspiracy. We have wide evidence that there was a coup plotted, whereas some people would say the evidence were entirely forged. And so it looks like no one trusts the other. So we already, Arnaud already alluded to the violence of the political debate in Turkey. But what matters to me also is the complete absence of true discussion between the different protagonists on the political scene.
Yeah, Turkish opposition must also understand that it needs to be totally separated from the army. And denouncing the fact that the sentences are very harsh should not prevent them from explaining also that it's not normal.
Why are they keen to defend the army then? What's that about?
Because it's the tradition of the left-wing party from being very close to the army. It's the Kemalist tradition. So they always appear to be strongly linked. Until now, but now, if they really want to build a really a stronger opposition, they need also to be totally separated from the army and not defend them for any case. Because yes, Erdogan is becoming more and more authoritarian, and Gezi Park and Occupy Gezi was partly because of that. But on the other side, it's not normal that the military and that the army was very often trying to interfere in politics. So both sides needs to work on trying to be much more constructive for the political debate.
Another tweet coming in here. Some of the Ergenekon defendants were probably guilty of certain crimes. There we go. Problem is they didn't get a fair trial. That's someone sending us a message there on Twitter called Statica. There you go. That's they didn't get a fair trial. Let's put that to Abdullah Bozkurt. We go to Abdullah and then after that to Henri Barkey. Abdullah Bozkurt, a fair trial. Doubting Turkish justice, saying these people didn't get a fair trial. What would you say to that?
Well, there is a lot of shortcomings, no doubt about that, in the Turkish judiciary, and we need to make a correction and progress on that. But with compared to other cases we have seen, in Turkey, even in ordinary land dispute cases, they have been going on for years. With compared to those cases, I think the Ergenekon case has received very positive and preferential treatment by the judiciary. Every day except Wednesday, they have been holding trials. But in other cases, they have a month apart from each hearings. And secondly, some of the Ergenekon defendants, they appealed their cases to the European Court of Human Rights. And the judges at the European Court of Human Rights, they dismiss almost all the charges that raised by the defendants, including not very reasonable charges. They don't know what they have been charged with, and not very compelling evidence or the fabricated evidence, as some of the participants said in this program. And the judges said no from the application they received from the government and the defendant's side. They have been very compelling evidence against the defendants, and they have been notified since the start. So a lot of propaganda actually were shut down by the European Court of Human Rights.
Abdullah, we'll come back to you in a moment. Let's bring in Henri Barkey from Lehigh University there over in Littleton, New Hampshire. In terms of Erdogan and his performance, a guest here in the studio is saying he's becoming more authoritarian. I think many people would agree with that. Certainly the images that we've been showing whilst people have been talking of the protests around Gezi Park and Taksim Square certainly give the impression of an authoritarian response. Do you feel there is something to fear in what Erdogan might do next, how it might turn next?
Look, I don't think this particular trial in one way or the other is going to affect Erdogan's behavior. Erdogan has already assumed complete command of Turkish politics. Turkey has become now a one-party, one-man state, only because the Turkish opposition has been completely ineffective in terms of coming up with new strategies, new ideas, and countering Erdogan's popularity. So Erdogan, there's a vacuum there, and Erdogan has completely filled the vacuum. This trial, the results of the trial is not as important as the fact that this trial occurred. The very fact of bringing chief of staff and four-star general in front of the courts was already historic enough. And the military, as I said earlier, has sufficiently defeated that Erdogan did not fear the military anymore. In fact, the military defeat occurred in 2007. From 2007
Mr. Barkey, I'm sorry to stop you mid-flow. We're having a technical issue here, which means we're not hearing you very well. We will ring you again and try to get a clearer line so everyone at home and in the studio, of course, can hear exactly what you're saying. That's Henri Barkey from Lehigh University there in the US. Let's come back to our guests in the studio to get more on this idea of Erdogan. Henri Barkey, they're saying that Erdogan is, without doubt, the most influential person in Turkish politics. It's become a one-party state and in many ways a one-man state, Erdogan representing everything. That can't be good, can it?
Just wanted to go back to one point. As I completely agree with Henri when he says that the army is so weak today that we cannot imagine that Erdogan is really afraid of a military coup. But at the same time, you see the reaction of the AKP after what happened in Egypt and the military removal of Morsi in Egypt. I mean, the Turkish government was in a complete panic. So they have also some sort of Pavlovian reflexes coming from the past that they are afraid that they're really in danger. And in the end, the army is still might be the #1 opponent in terms of the people they can mobilize to oppose the government. And another thing is we should not assume that the JP, the Kemalist member of parliaments who were tried, were innocent only because they were member of the opposition and the AKP wants to get rid of them. I mean, this would be completely unfair. This is again a caricature of the Turkish politics.
It's not black and white. There are so many grey areas and so many different layers to this story.
I guess some of these people, some of the people were tried within the Ergenekon case, even if many different cases were aggregated inside Ergenekon in a very strange way, in a very awkward way. I mean, the kernel has something to do with what is called in Turkey the deep state, which is a kind of coalition between extreme right nationalists and the army, and who are kind of working behind the state, behind the scene, to decide on the future of the country. So this really refers to the history of Turkey over the last decades. And the problem is that this trial has not clarified anything. It was the function of this trial to kind of get rid completely of these bad reflexes of the past, and on the contrary, it's kind of running them again.
You mentioned
Why?
Egypt. We had a tweet about Egypt from Mohammed Hemish. Wonder what Turkey government think of the Muslim Brotherhood sitting in Egypt. Is it peaceful or a group of thugs and terrorists threatening government? Well, food for thought there. Maybe we'll not pick up on that one. But certainly the reaction, as Dorothée was saying, Arnaud, to what happened in Egypt certainly showed the true colours in many ways of Erdogan and where he comes from.
Yes, because as Dorothée said, there was a real panic, and because he was also losing an ally in the region, and we know that in the recent years, diplomacy, and especially diplomacy with the neighboring countries, were very important for Erdogan. But just to continue what Dorothée said, yes, there's a tradition of political violence in Turkey. We mentioned the deep state. We can also mention the grey wolves and the 3 military coups since 1960s. So when we say that Erdogan is becoming more and more authoritarian, because it's true, is it because of him being an Islamist and having a hidden agenda? I don't think so. Or is it because of him being in direct line with the political tradition of Turkish politics? And I think when Erdogan is when he's becoming more authoritarian, it's just like a lot of Turkish politicians that were in the Turkish political scene, and so it means that what Turkey really needs is to liberalize. Deeply liberalize the state. They need more balance of power. They need the army to be separated from politics. They need the justice to be separated from both the government, and they need the middle class to be totally liberalized. But being liberalized means also that the institutions such as the army should not try to make a military plot against military coup against an elected government.
Let's pick up on another tweet that's come in. What's going on now in Turkey is literally a civil dictator by Erdogan. People even fear criticising him, criticising his party. Thank you for that comment. Let's bring in Tolga, who is a Turkish citizen in London, risk analyst as well. In terms of what Erdogan does, how he rules the country, would you agree with that? Would you agree that basically this is almost, dictatorship is maybe too strong a word, but there is a fear of criticising Erdogan within Turkey now?
I think it's not just straight dictatorship, but authoritarian tendencies and intervention, states and governments' intervention to daily individual spaces is increasing. But first, I want to make myself clear. I didn't mean that Gezi Park protests and Ergenekon case are very similar. But on the other hand, what I meant was, due to Gezi protests, the old secularist versus Islamist or conservatives, whatever you may say, paradigm is shifting to a new agenda. I think it will be much more freedom versus authoritarian tendencies, the intervention to daily lives of the individuals versus states' authoritarian tendencies. And Ergenekon trial and all those trials against military figures will find a new place in this paradigm with a much more focus on freedoms, the shortcomings in Turkey's judicial system, and the basic rights of individuals. That's what I meant. On the other hand, I think the Turkish system, which comes from 1980 coup, is giving the leaders of all parties immense power. And Erdogan has been the most popular prime minister this country has seen in decades. So I think due to these shortcomings in the system, government's authoritarian tendencies are being reflected. But I think this suggests this system is not carrying anymore. And I think Gezi Park incident has been one of those big signals that this system is not enough for Turkey. Turkey is much more a progressive country now.
Personal freedom, though, would you say personal freedom is improving in Turkey?
In fact, I think if you have the same idea with the government or the ruling party, for you it doesn't matter. But for the people who have a different lifestyle, who think otherwise, the government is trying to impose their own moral, I would say, daily behaviors or subjects to the society, as we see when Prime Minister Erdogan says to have at least 3 children, when alcohol restrictions the legislation is done. But when you look at the health side of that issue, for example, Turkey has the very least consumption in alcohol in Europe, but Turkey's new law is, for example, as harsh as the Scandinavian countries nearly. So I would say that this, even if there's no agenda, this creates a very big perception among the other segments of society which didn't vote for Erdogan. And this creates a big tension. And I think this polarization will find itself in the political scene. However, as I said, Gezi incident is bringing it more into the freedoms, the human rights issues, for the first time, because during Gezi Park protests, for the first time, people from different political opinions got together under basic principles. Like, you could never see a Kurdish nationalist in hand in hand with an ultra-Turkish nationalist. But those kind of authoritarian tendencies, even if it's not, some argue it's not authoritarian.
Tolga, we're getting the picture, thank you. And you mentioned the Kurds as well. That's yet another aspect to Turkish society which creates another layer of perhaps confusion and perhaps misunderstanding on many levels, but it shows the complexity of what goes on there. Tolga, I'm sorry to cut you off. I want to go back to our man in Ankara, Abdullah Bozkurt. Abdullah, we've talked about the deep state here in the studio. Obviously, this trial, the Ergenekon conspiracy, very much tied up with this idea of the deep state. Would you say the deep state in Turkey now is finished?
I don't think so, because the deep state is nestled within the heart of the country with the military backing, which engulf media, business, parliamentarians, everybody from different walks of life. So it's about culture. The verdict that we have seen today is only, one step on the right direction. But we need to do more to establish a democratic culture in Turkey. But I am very hopeful in that regard, because transformation that's happening in Turkish society is a reflective of the government. It doesn't matter whether the government or Erdogan tries to use authoritarian measures, try to silence its critics. I think it's a futile attempt, because with the social media, internet technology, and it's very difficult to exercise kind of censorship that every government wants. In Turkey, they may put pressure on the media owners to fire some of the columnists from the paper, which is very critical of the government. But that columnist goes out and set up a website and still writes his own views about the government. So I think it's a futile attempt. And secondly, I think there are still counterbalances to the immense power Erdogan accumulated himself and in the party. There are still, independent judiciary in Turkey, and the reason that the government proposed a major amendment to change the judiciary, I think, is a reflective of that fact. They wanted to control the judicial council, which sits at the heart of the judiciary in Turkey.
Abdullah, I need to pause you to bring in Arnaud here in the studio. I'm sorry, so Arnaud has a comment on what you were saying.
Sure.
Yes. He said that it's very complicated to establish censorship, but according to the Union of Turkish Journalists, 72 journalists have been fired after because of their coverage of the Gezi Park protests. So there's still a lot of censorship, and I think it's increasing now. When you attack on religion or when you attack on
freedom
Erdogan
of the press
himself,
is, of course, the foundation of the true democracy, isn't it?
Watch their every word also.
Indeed. We have a tweet coming in on the issue of Erdogan's rule. It's from Melta Mortimer. It reads, "No, Mark, not really dictatorship, but definitely hubris syndrome." Hubris is overreaching ambition, if you don't know. Intoxication of too much power for too long. Final diagnosis there. Is that the problem in the studio here, Dorothée and Arnaud, that Erdogan doesn't have a viable opposition, doesn't have anyone challenging him, and therefore there's that possibility he goes too far?
Of course, in terms of democratic culture, the opposition party also has to democratize. The main problem for the next elections coming next year, local and presidential elections, is that the reform of the JP seems to be completely impossible at present. So.
Okay, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dorothée Schmidt and Arnaud CASTAIGNET here in the studio. Thanks to our guests as well, joining us from afar from Ankara, Abdullah Bozkurt from Zaman. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I'm sorry to cut you off a moment ago there. And joining us from London by phone, Tolga. We appreciate your point of view and your time, sir. And thanks to Henri BARKEY, who we lost at some point. Sadly, we couldn't manage to get back to you, Henri, but thank you for being part of our debate here. And thank you for watching too. You're watching France 24, of course. Do stay with us. So...